The Spanish Inquisition became infamous not merely because of its trials or decrees, but because of the systematic use of torture as a tool to enforce obedience and extract confessions. Torture was not an accidental byproduct of its proceedings. It was embedded in its structure, a deliberate mechanism meant to create an atmosphere of fear. By employing devices like the rack, the strapado, and water torture, inquisitors transformed the very idea of investigation into a process of controlled agony. The goal was not to determine truth through evidence, but to bend truth into whatever shape the inquisitors demanded. Among the most feared instruments was the rack, a wooden frame with rollers at each end. Victims were bound hand and foot, then slowly stretched as the rollers were turned. Muscles tore, joints popped, and ligaments ripped apart while the victims screamed in unbearable pain. The rack was not always used to kill, but to prolong suffering until the victim would agree to anything to make it stop. It became a defining symbol of the Inquisition's cruelty, where pain itself became the courtroom and the victim's broken body the testimony. The strapado was another favored device, deceptively simple yet devastating. The victim's hands were tied behind their back, and they were hoisted into the air by a rope attached to their wrists. The sudden suspension dislocated shoulders and caused intense tearing in the arms and chest. Sometimes, weights were tied to the feet, compounding the agony. Victims dangled helplessly, screaming in pain, their bodies wrenched apart by their own weight. It was a method designed not only to cause suffering, but to instill fear even in those who only heard about it. The thought that one could be yanked skyward, bones snapping under the strain, was enough to keep communities silent and obedient. Water torture, known today as an early form of waterboarding, was also widely used. Victims were strapped down as cloth was forced into their mouths, then soaked with water, inducing the terrifying sensation of drowning. The victim choked, gasped, and panicked as their lungs strained for air. The psychological torment of suffocation was often worse than the physical pain. Even those who survived were left deeply scarred, haunted by the memory of being drowned without water filling their lungs. It was a method that left little evidence but shattered minds, making it one of the most insidious tools in the Inquisition's arsenal. These tortures were not used sparingly. They were applied systematically, part of a legal framework that rationalized suffering as a pathway to truth. Inquisitors claimed that torture was necessary to extract confessions, but the reality was that it served as a tool of domination. Under the crushing pressure of broken limbs or the suffocating terror of water, victims would confess to anything. Innocence or guilt became irrelevant. The truth was whatever the inquisitors wanted it to be, and torture was the method by which it was manufactured. The psychological effects of this systematic torture rippled far beyond the dungeon. The mere threat of these devices was enough to terrify entire communities. Tales of the rack, the strapado, and water torture spread quickly, whispered in marketplaces and behind closed doors. Families taught their children to remain silent. Neighbors distrusted one another, and entire cities lived under the shadow of these instruments. The devices themselves became symbols of authority, reminders that defiance meant pain, and pain meant destruction. The Inquisition's reliance on torture also revealed the chilling efficiency of its system. Torture was not applied in chaos, but with procedure. Rules dictated how long a victim could be stretched, how many times they could be hoisted, how much water could be poured. This veneer of legality disguised the cruelty, giving it the appearance of order and justice, while ensuring the outcome was predetermined. By institutionalizing torture, the Inquisition transformed suffering into bureaucracy, making cruelty not an exception but a sanctioned practice. The legacy of this systematic torture remains one of the darkest chapters in European history. It showed that pain could be weaponized, not only to punish, but to control. The rack, the strappado, and water torture were not merely tools of interrogation. They were instruments of fear, designed to silence entire populations through the suffering of the few. The Inquisition proved that systematic torture could break not just individuals, but societies themselves, leaving a legacy of silence, submission, and terror that endured long after the screams faded. The Spanish Inquisition is often remembered as an institution that hunted heretics, those who defied the Catholic Church's teachings. But its reach extended far beyond heresy alone. Over time, it became a tool of wide-ranging control, targeting Jews who had converted to Christianity, Muslims who remained after the Reconquista, intellectuals, political dissenters, and even ordinary citizens caught in webs of suspicion. It was not simply about defending doctrine. It was about enforcing conformity in every aspect of life. Anyone who fell outside the narrow boundaries of approved faith and loyalty could find themselves accused, imprisoned, or broken beneath the weight of its authority. At its inception, in 1478, the Inquisition was established under Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs of Spain. Its primary goal was to ensure the sincerity of Jewish converts, conversos, many of whom had been compelled to abandon Judaism under threat of exile or violence. The monarchy and the church feared that these new Christians might secretly maintain Jewish practices. The Inquisition became the tool to root out such suspicions. Families who lit candles on Friday evenings, avoided pork, or observed fasting rituals could be accused of Judaizing. Even a simple gesture could become evidence of heresy. For conversos, life became a precarious balancing act, where even private customs might be twisted into proof of disloyalty. The same scrutiny extended to Muslims after the fall of Granada in 1492. Forced conversions created another group of suspects known as Moriscos, who were likewise accused of clinging secretly to their old faith. As with the Jews, any sign of Islamic practice, language, clothing, dietary customs could provoke investigation. The Inquisition's power reached into the most intimate corners of life, turning religious identity into a matter of constant surveillance. For thousands, the only way to survive was to erase every trace of their heritage, though even this was no guarantee against accusation. But the Inquisition did not stop at religion. Over time, its net widened to capture anyone who threatened authority, whether politically, socially, or intellectually. Writers who challenged orthodox theology, scientists whose discoveries seemed to contradict scripture, and nobles suspected of plotting rebellion could all be dragged before the tribunal. Heresy in this sense became a flexible charge, one that could be stretched to encompass anything the monarchy or the church deemed dangerous. The Inquisition thus became both a religious and political weapon, silencing dissent of every kind. The way accusations spread made the institution even more terrifying. Anyone could denounce anyone else, neighbors, friends, even family members. A whispered suspicion was enough to bring the Inquisition's attention. Accusations often came from envy, rivalry, or personal vendetta, but once made, they carried enormous weight. Defending oneself against charges was nearly impossible with torture at their disposal. Inquisitors could always extract confessions, and once branded a heretic, acquittal was rare. Entire families could be ruined by a single denunciation. The consequences of this broad targeting were devastating. Communities were fractured by distrust, as people lived in fear of being accused. Minority groups, especially conversos and Moriscos, were stripped of their traditions, forced to assimilate under constant suspicion. Intellectual life withered under censorship, as scholars and writers learned that curiosity could be fatal. Even the wealthy and powerful were not immune. Noble families saw their fortunes confiscated, their members imprisoned, and their reputations destroyed by charges of heresy. The Inquisition was not only a court but a weapon, wielded against anyone who threatened the unity and authority of church and crown. This reach beyond heresy gave the Inquisition extraordinary power. It could touch anyone, anywhere, regardless of station or sincerity of faith. The boundaries between religious dissent, cultural difference, and political opposition blurred, allowing inquisitors to pursue cases wherever it suited the monarchy's interests. For ordinary people, the message was clear: no one was safe. The Inquisition's scope extended into every household, every community, and every corner of society. The legacy of this broad targeting endures as one of the most chilling aspects of the Spanish Inquisition. It showed how easily institutions built to enforce faith could expand into mechanisms of total control. Heresy was only the starting point. From there, the Inquisition became a tool to police identity, culture, and thought itself. Its victims were not only those who openly defied the church, but countless others whose only crime was being different, suspect, or inconvenient to power. In this way, the Spanish Inquisition proved itself not merely an instrument of religious orthodoxy, but one of the most far-reaching systems of repression in European history. For the authorities, these public trials served multiple purposes. They reinforced the unity of church and crown, projecting the image of an inseparable partnership defending faith and order. They instilled obedience through fear. The dungeons and torture chambers of the Spanish Inquisition inspired fear in secret. Its public trials and executions spread terror openly on a grand stage. The most infamous of these were the autos, defied, acts of faith. Public ceremonies where sentences were announced and punishments carried out, often before massive crowds. Far from being discreet affairs, they were deliberate spectacles of power, staged to remind entire communities that heresy, dissent, or even the suspicion of difference would be met with humiliation, violence, and death. The auto day began as a solemn ritual. The accused, dressed in penitential garments called sanbenitos, long tunics, often marked with symbols of flames, demons, or crosses, were paraded before the public. These garments made their guilt visible, branding them as heretics before they had even spoken. The condemned were marched in processions through city streets, accompanied by guards, priests, and officials. Citizens gathered along the routes to watch the broken figures shuffle by, their humiliation serving as a visible reminder of what awaited those who strayed from the path of orthodoxy. Once at the site, often a public square or open field large enough to hold thousands, the event unfolded like a grim theater. Nobles, clergy, and commoners alike filled the space. Royalty sometimes attended, their presence underscoring the partnership between church and crown. The atmosphere was paradoxical, part religious service, part public spectacle. Hymns were sung, prayers were recited, and then sentences were read aloud for all to hear. Some of the accused received lighter penances, pilgrimages, fines, or imprisonment, but many others faced harsher fates, condemned to flogging, torture, or death by fire. The burnings at the stake were the climax of the auto de-fe. Victims were tied to wooden posts surrounded by piles of wood and set ablaze before the eyes of the assembled crowd. The symbolism was explicit. The flames of the pyre mirrored the eternal flames of hell. As smoke filled the air and screams rose, the message was driven home. This was the fate of heretics, and this was the power of the Inquisition. These executions were not carried out in secret, but designed as public warnings, instilling fear in every witness. Yet, even those not burned suffered humiliation. The mere act of being paraded in a sanbenito destroyed reputations, stigmatized families, and marked individuals for life. Records of punishments were preserved in church registers, ensuring that the shame endured across generations. The visibility of the punishment meant that the Inquisition's reach extended beyond the immediate victims to their descendants, who carried the stigma of association with heresy long after the trials ended, binding onlookers that even the slightest deviation could lead to ruin. And they turned punishment into theater, ensuring that the suffering of the few became a lesson for the many. The auto de fe also reflected the Inquisition's obsession with visibility. Heresy was seen not only as a spiritual crime but as a contagion, one that had to be publicly identified and eradicated. By staging these trials in open spaces, inquisitors sought to purify society, making a spectacle of repentance, punishment, and death. The ritualized nature of the ceremonies gave them an air of legitimacy, cloaking cruelty in the language of faith. But beneath the prayers and processions lay an unmistakable truth. These were performances of dominance, designed to intimidate and control. The psychological impact of these spectacles was profound. Children grew up watching neighbors humiliated, whipped, or burned. Families carried the fear of denunciation in their daily lives. Communities fractured under the weight of suspicion, as the threat of public disgrace loomed over every household. The Inquisition did not just punish individuals. It reshaped entire societies through the collective fear generated by its public trials. The legacy of the auto de fe remains one of the most infamous symbols of the Spanish Inquisition. Its ceremonies combined ritual, humiliation, and violence in a way that blurred the lines between religion and theater, justice and spectacle. They ensured that punishment was not only about the condemned, but about the community that watched, reminding everyone that obedience was not optional, but enforced with fire. The Spanish Inquisition was not only about dungeons, torture devices, or burnings at the stake. Its greatest weapon may have been fear itself, an invisible force that seeped into every corner of society. It created a climate where no one felt safe, where friends, neighbors, and even family members might become informants. This psychological warfare fractured communities more effectively than chains or fire. By encouraging suspicion and secrecy, the Inquisition turned ordinary life into a battlefield of trust, where every conversation, every gesture, and every silence could be twisted into evidence of heresy. The system thrived on denunciation. Anyone could accuse anyone else of suspicious behavior. A whispered word, a grudge, or even envy could spark an investigation. For minorities, conversos, Jewish converts, and Moriscos, Muslim converts, the danger was constant. Lighting a candle on the wrong day, refusing to eat pork, or speaking in an unfamiliar tongue could be enough to invite suspicion. Once accused, the weight of proof fell not on the inquisitors, but on the accused themselves, who had to prove a purity of faith that could never be fully demonstrated. This imbalance created a society of paranoia, where silence was safer than honesty, and conformity was a means of survival. The secrecy of the trials added to the psychological torment. Victims often did not know who had accused them, nor the precise nature of the charges. They were held in isolation, deprived of the chance to defend themselves openly. Confessions, extracted through torture or intimidation, became the primary evidence. The accused could be trapped in a cycle of suspicion and confession, forced to name others simply to relieve their own suffering. This practice spread fear outward like ripples on water, as each accusation created more. The threat of the Inquisition was not confined to those in its prisons. The possibility of being denounced haunted every household. Parents taught children to be cautious in their words. Spouses grew wary of one another, and friendships were shattered by the weight of suspicion. Communities where people once shared meals and traditions grew fractured, as cultural practices were abandoned for fear of discovery. Even private prayer became dangerous, for any act outside the rigid forms approved by the Church could be misinterpreted as heretical. The mental strain was immense. Victims and their families lived in a constant state of dread. The sound of footsteps outside the door at night could trigger panic, as inquisitors were known to arrest suspects without warning. Families who saw loved ones taken away had no certainty they would ever return. The psychological toll of this uncertainty was devastating, eroding not only personal well-being but the very fabric of society. Fear became a permanent companion, shaping how people lived, spoke, and believed. The Inquisition also exploited shame as a weapon. Even when an accused individual was not executed, the punishment of public penance or wearing the San Benito garment marked them for life. The stigma extended to their children and grandchildren, ensuring that entire families lived under a cloud of suspicion for generations. This collective punishment deepened the psychological terror, for people understood that an accusation did not only destroy individuals, it destroyed bloodlines. Perhaps the most insidious effect of this psychological warfare was the way it internalized obedience. People censored themselves long before inquisitors intervened. Fear of surveillance made them compliant without force. Entire communities policed themselves, abandoning traditions, avoiding risky conversations, and striving to appear unquestioningly orthodox. The Inquisition did not need to arrest everyone. It only needed to arrest enough to make the threat omnipresent. In this way, fear became self-sustaining, a silent enforcer that outlasted the flames of the auto de fe. This climate of suspicion also served the monarchy and the church by eliminating opposition before it could take shape. Intellectuals thought twice before publishing controversial works. Nobles wary of political disputes knew how quickly charges of heresy could erase wealth and power. Even the wealthy and powerful could be humbled by an accusation, their estates seized, their reputations ruined. The psychological power of the Inquisition was in its unpredictability. No one knew when or where its gaze would fall. The legacy of this psychological warfare lingers in how the Inquisition is remembered today. Its cruelty is not measured only in executions, but in the countless lives lived under the shadow of fear. The paranoia it spread destroyed trust, fractured communities, and silenced voices that might have contributed to Spain's intellectual and cultural life. It created a world where fear was as real a punishment as fire, leaving scars that endured for generations. The Spanish Inquisition may have ended centuries ago, but its legacy has endured as one of the most infamous symbols of religious and political repression in history. Its brutality left behind not only a trail of broken bodies, but also a cultural and psychological scar that reshaped Spain and echoed across Europe. What began as an institution to enforce religious purity became a mechanism of intolerance, whose trauma reached far beyond its victims. The Inquisition's shadow lingered in the fear it instilled, the communities it fractured, and the cultural voices it silenced. The intolerance it bred was perhaps its most lasting mark. Jews and Muslims, once integral to the intellectual and cultural life of Spain, were driven out, forced to convert, or subjected to relentless suspicion. Centuries of convivencia, relative coexistence among Christians, Jews, and Muslims, collapsed under the weight of suspicion and persecution. Those who converted lived in constant fear of denunciation, stripped of their traditions and forced to erase their identities. Entire cultures were uprooted, leaving Spain poorer in diversity, ideas, and tolerance. What was lost was not only lives, but centuries of knowledge, art, and shared heritage. The trauma extended beyond minority groups. Intellectual life itself suffered under the Inquisition's control. Writers, scholars, and scientists learned that stepping outside the bounds of orthodoxy was dangerous. Books were banned, manuscripts destroyed, and ideas silenced. Fear stifled inquiry, cutting off Spain from currents of thought that were flourishing elsewhere in Europe. The memory of Galileo's trial in Italy, mirrored by the silencing of thinkers in Spain, showed how the machinery of intolerance could halt scientific and philosophical progress. The trauma here was not just individual, it was civilizational, holding back generations of potential innovation. The stigma imposed by the Inquisition also persisted for centuries. Families whose ancestors had been accused often carried the burden of shame long after the tribunal ended. The limpieza de sangre, purity of blood, became a tool of exclusion where those of Jewish or Muslim ancestry were barred from certain offices, professions, and honors. This obsession with lineage extended the trauma of the Inquisition across generations, embedding intolerance into the very structure of society. To be tainted by association was to live under a cloud of suspicion, a silent reminder of how deeply the Inquisition's reach penetrated. The collective trauma of communities targeted by the Inquisition cannot be overstated. For Jews expelled in 1492, exile scattered families across Europe, North Africa, and the Ottoman Empire. For Muslims, forced conversions and subsequent persecution meant the destruction of their cultural presence in Spain. For converts, both conversos and moriscos, life was a daily performance of conformity, where even private customs could be fatal. This loss of identity, enforced by fear, left scars that echoed for centuries. The trauma of cultural erasure is harder to measure than executions, but it was no less devastating. Even those who survived with their faith intact bore wounds. Living under constant threat of denunciation bred habits of silence, secrecy, and mistrust that lingered long after the Inquisition faded. Families censored themselves, neighbors avoided intimacy, and intellectuals shied away from controversy. This climate of suspicion persisted, shaping Spain's cultural and political character well beyond the Inquisition's official end. In many ways, its most enduring legacy was not its executions, but the culture of fear it normalized. The memory of the Spanish Inquisition became a global symbol of cruelty and tolerance, and the abuse of power. Later centuries invoked it as an example of what happens when authority is unchecked, when religion and politics merge to crush dissent. The very phrase, Inquisition, came to mean more than a tribunal. It became shorthand for persecution itself. Its name survives as a warning, invoked whenever societies face the temptation to sacrifice freedom for conformity, or to silence difference in the name of unity. Today, historians continue to debate the scope and scale of its violence, but its legacy as a cultural trauma is undeniable. It demonstrates how institutions can weaponize fear, how intolerance can fracture societies, and how trauma can echo across generations. The Spanish Inquisition was more than a chapter in history. It was a turning point that reshaped Spain's identity, leaving behind a legacy of suspicion and loss. The true horror of the Inquisition lies not only in the numbers of its victims, but in the enduring intolerance and trauma it left behind. It destroyed trust within communities, extinguished cultural diversity, silenced intellectual life, and left descendants with a burden of shame. Its legacy reminds us that cruelty does not vanish when the flames of the da-fe go out. Trauma endures, intolerance lingers, and the scars of repression remain long after the torturers have gone.